Welcome back to the Left 4 Dead Hammer tutorial. You should now have a brush that measures 512 units wide, 512 units long, and 16 units high. To get yourself oriented and see our new floor, you can use the 3D view pane. In order to move around in the 3D view pane, you have to use a combination of keyboard keys and mouse commands. To rotate the camera, you hold down the space bar while left-clicking the mouse and moving the mouse in the desired direction to turn the camera. To move the camera's location in the space, you can hold the space bar while right-clicking and moving the mouse to reposition the camera. Zooming works like the 2D panes and can be done by using the mouse wheel. If you're familiar with first-person shooter keyboard layouts, the W, A, S, and D keys can also be used in the 3D view to zoom and strafe as if you were playing in the map. Go ahead and position the camera so you can see the floor, which will probably be covered in the default texture the infamous pills here add. We'll change this later. Once the camera is positioned, hit the escape key again to remove the selection on the floor brush. Change back to the block tool so we can make walls for the room. In the top 2D view, make a selection that is 16 units wide and runs the whole 512 unit length down the left side of the floor. You may notice that the selection is also only 16 units high and is actually inside the floor. The block tool will remember the dimensions of the last item you had selected and will use the dimensions for the default length of the side that you don't specify because of whatever 2D view you use the tool in. To correct this, use the handles in either the front or the side view panes and make it so the selection is 128 units high and sits on top of the floor brush. Once it is the correct size, go ahead and hit enter to create the brush. As you may well know, rooms are often created with 4 walls, and opposite walls are often the same dimensions. A shortcut to having to draw a new brush every time you want to make something like a wall is to create a copy of an existing brush. In order to do this properly, you will need to enable nudging of objects with arrow keys. Open the Tools menu and pick Options. In the new window, click the 2D Views tab and check the box next to Arrow Keys Nudge Selected Object Vertex and hit OK. Now hit Escape to exit back to the Selection tool, and with the wall brush still selected, or if it got deselected, click it so it's highlighted in red in the 3D view. Once the wall is selected, move your mouse cursor over into the top 2D view plane so it has focus, and hold Shift and hit the right arrow key once. You will notice that the original wall brush is still in place, but directly next to it you now have a copy of the wall brush that is currently selected. Let go of the Shift key unless you want 20 more copies of the wall, and use the right arrow key to nudge the second wall all the way to the right of your floor. Having the walls and floor all the same texture can be somewhat disorientating, so let's fix that before we move on. In the texture group on the right, hit the Browse button to bring up the texture browser. In the filter field at the bottom of the window, type dev_measure, and the texture browser should filter out all of the textures except those with dev_measure in their name. Select the dev measure generic 01B texture, which is a gray texture with white lines on it, by double-clicking on it, and the texture window should disappear. With the selection tool active, click your floor brush so it is highlighted. With the floor highlighted, click the Apply Current Texture button, and the floor is now covered in the new texture. Hit Escape to deselect the floor and open up the texture browser window again. This time, select the Dev Measure Generic 01 texture, which looks like the previous one, only it is orange instead of gray. Back in the 3D view, click on one of the walls so it's highlighted, and hold the Control button and left-click on the other wall, so now both walls should be highlighted. Again, press the Apply Current Texture button, and now both walls will have the new orange texture applied to them. Deselect the walls by hitting Escape and switch back to the block tool so we can create the other walls. In the top 2D view, draw a wall 16 units wide that stretches from the inner faces of the two existing walls. It should be 480 units long. You will notice that the wall is the correct height this time because we had our existing wall selected most recently. We draw the wall so it only touches the existing walls and doesn't actually intersect them, because this can lead to a problem known as Z-fighting, where the game is unsure of which face it should draw if there are overlapping faces of brushes, so we don't ever want to have anything intersecting. Go ahead and hit enter to create the wall. Notice that this time it's automatically created with the orange developer texture applied to it. That's the last texture we had selected in the texture group. Copy this wall and place it in the gap on the other side of the room. How about a ceiling? Let's copy the floor and place it on top of our walls. Remember, we don't want any intersect brushes. Now that we have our room completed, let's have a look inside. Navigate with the 3D camera view so that you are inside our room. While the inside of our room looks bright and Hammer, the truth is that with our current views, we're not using any kind of lighting calculations. If you were to load this map into Left 4 Dead, the inside of the room would be pitch black, so let's add a light. Select the Entity tool, and over on the tool specific options, click in the Objects field and type Light. Select Light from the drop-down list. In your 3D camera view, click somewhere on the ceiling to place the light entity. You should see a light bulb appear in the 3D view representing the light entity. Now that we have a light source, let's add some more things to our room. In the Tool Options group, click on the Objects field again and type Info. Scroll through the list until you find Info Player Start and click it. Back in your 3D view, click somewhere on the floor to place the Player Start entity, which lets the Source Engine know where you want it to spawn players when the map loads. You should see a neon green character model appear where you clicked that has some familiar facial features for those of you who've played Half-Life. Let's add a table to this room so it doesn't seem so barren. With the Entity tool still selected, click in the Object field and type Prop. Scroll through the list until you find Prop Static. Place this entity somewhere in the room on the floor. You may notice that what you place doesn't look anything like a table, and that's because it's not yet. Hit the Escape key once so you return back to the Selection tool. Double-click on the entity you just placed and a new window should appear, the Object Properties window. In this window, you can change many properties associated with any object in the map, including brushes or obviously entities. What we want to do is assign a model to our static prop. So in the list of properties, find the World Model property and double-click it. What's going to happen is the Model Browser window is going to open. If this is the first time you've ever opened the Model Browser window, you'll have to give it a few minutes to read through all the available models. Just like when you started Hammer, this can appear to freeze for several minutes. If you wait a few minutes and it still doesn't appear to be responding, close the Model Browser window and open it again. It should open with no problems the second time, assuming it cached all the models previously. We're trying to make a table, so in the filter field at the bottom of the window, type Table. In the now filtered list, scroll through until you find a model named IT MKT Table 2 Model. Select it and hit the OK button, which should bring you back to the Object Properties window and has filled in the World Model field with our model. If everything is working so far, hit the Apply button and you might be able to see the entity cube change into the table in your 3D view. Close the Object Properties window by hitting the X button in the upper right to return to the Hammer workspace. If you look at your table in the 3D view pane, you might notice that it's hovering in the air or it's colliding with the walls or a floor. To correct this, you can nudge the table just like we nudged the walls earlier with the arrow keys. It's also probably a good idea to reduce the grid size down to 1 for fine adjustments when you're trying to get the table to line up with the wall or the floor. Once you have it placed, hit Escape and deselect it to prevent any unwanted movements from occurring.